A man stood over the shape of a body lying before him. Candles flickered in the dark as Rabbi Judah bent down, his hands still dusted with clay from the riverbank. The form beneath him was not flesh and blood, but earth shaped into the likeness of a human body. Arms, legs, torso, face, fashioned not from pride or curiosity, but from necessity. In the old legends of Prague, it is said that when false accusations and violence threatened the Jewish community, and no protection came from the world beyond its walls, the rabbi turned inward towards sacred knowledge, long guarded and rarely used. Under cover of night, he had walked to the banks of the Vltava River, gathering clay with his own hands, and he shaped it with prayer. Now, circling the figure, he whispered holy names, aligning breath with intention, until he reached forward and inscribed a single word upon its forehead: Emet, truth. And beneath the figure's tongue, he placed a small parchment bearing the divine name, the Shem, not to give it a soul, but to lend it motion, a borrowed spark. The clay stirred, the chest rose, the golem stood. It did not speak, it did not question, it obeyed. By day it guarded the streets, by night it stood watch, tireless and powerful and exacting. It followed every command as given. It was strength without hesitation and action without doubt. And yet, as the days passed, something started to shift. The golem grew heavier in its movements. Its strength became blunt. Where it once protected, it now overreached. Where it once responded, it now reacted. It could not tell danger from shadow. It could not tell threat from confusion. It knew only force. And as we know, force untempered by understanding does not remain still. Each week before Shabbat, or the holy day of rest, the rabbi removed the Shem, returning the golem to clay, so that no work would be done on the day of rest. But one week, the balance seemed to slip. Some say the rabbi forgot to remove the Shem. Others say the golem had grown too strong too fast. What is agreed upon is this: the power meant to protect, well, it began to endanger. Seeing what had happened, the rabbi approached the golem one final time. He reached up and he erased the first letter of the word on its forehead, Emet, truth, and it became Met, dead. The borrowed life left the body, the clay collapsed back into the earth, and the rabbi hid the remains away, not in shame, but in silence. What was left behind was not a warning against creation, but a teaching that power without inner awareness does not stay neutral, that vitality severed from consciousness becomes distortion. That truth must live not only on the surface but within. The golem had power but no inner reflection. It had action but without soul awareness. And what began as protection slowly morphed into danger as its strength grew. It grew indiscriminate and its movements were unthinking until the very force meant to guard life began to threaten it. This is a reminder that life animated without inner integration does not become neutral. It becomes distorted. And this is where the story quietly turns inward, because the golem is not a monster, but a mirror, showing us what happens when vitality is separated from consciousness, when force is cut off from reflection, when something alive moves without seeing itself. And it is from this place that I want to open today's reading, because Yeats's poem, The Two Trees, is not about good and evil, but about perception itself, and how the same life force can appear radiant or barren depending on the inner mirror through which it is seen. And so I invite you now to listen to the poem as if through a looking glass. Let's get started. Beloved, gaze in thine own heart. The holy tree is growing there. From joy the holy branches start, and all the trembling flowers they bear. The changing colors of its fruit have dowered the stars with merry light. The surety of its hidden root has planted quiet in the night. The shaking of its leafy head has given the waves their melody and made my lips and music wed, murmuring a wizard's song for thee. For there the loves a circle go, the flaming circle of our days, gyring, spiring to and fro in those great ignorant leafy ways, remembering all that shaken hair and how the winged sandals dart. Thine eyes grow full of tender care. Beloved, gaze in thine own heart. Gaze no more in the bitter glass. The demons with their subtle guile lift up before us when they pass, or only gaze a little while. For there a fatal image grows that the stormy night receives, roots half hidden under snows, broken boughs and blackened leaves. For all things turn to barrenness. In the dim glass the demons hold, the glass of outer weariness, made when God slept in times of old. There through the broken branches go the ravens of unresting thought, flying, crying to and fro, cruel claw and hungry throat, or else they stand and sniff the wind and shake their ragged wings, alas. Thy tender eyes grow all unkind. Gaze no more in the bitter glass. When Yeats speaks of the bitter glass and the twisted tree, he is not saying that the world has become ugly. He is saying that something in the way of seeing has narrowed, and this idea echoes deeply through mystical thought. In the biblical story of the Garden of Eden, we see the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The fruit from the tree of life gave Adam and Eve eternal youth, but when they ate of the other tree, they could not integrate it, and their wholeness was fractured. Not because knowledge itself is fracturing, but rather because their own inner mirrors distorted what they saw. The story of Eden is not about punishment, but about knowledge. Knowledge grasped without integration, which leads to shame, separation, and a fractured gaze of self. And then there's the Shekinah, the divine presence, the feminine soul of the world. She had once walked beside humanity, luminous and near. She had filled the gardens with song, lit up the eyes of the prophets, and whispered truth in the hearts of the humble. She was the inner soul of every tree, river, fire, and friend. But over time, as people turned away from the sacred, the Shekinah was exiled, not far but hidden, like a queen cast out of her own kingdom. She now walked the alleys of the world in rags, waiting to be recognized, still near but unseen. Once her absence is truly noticed, a great longing arises in the soul. You see, often in our own mirror, the distortion comes because we do not know what we don't know. We don't know that we are looking at a distortion. Because the absence of clarity makes the twisted vision we see seem like reality. And so in our hearts, we realize that the Shekinah is not just out there. She is the soul within us that we have forgotten, the spark we have covered with the noise of the world and the speed of life. And wherever she is remembered, she begins to return. This is our invitation, not to just move through life, accepting whatever visions or distortions we are presented with, but to inhabit life, to challenge the mirror, to nurture our inner tree until it is overflowing with fruit. The Sufi mystic Rumi says, "The world is a tree bowed down with fruit, while you bend over, picking up rotten apples." This is a reminder that the exile of the Shekinah, or the divine presence, is about the truth being hidden, not destroyed, and hidden things can always be found again. In Jewish mystical thought, this inner division is spoken of through two forces that live in every human being: the Yetzer HaTov, the inclination towards goodness and harmony and divine alignment, and the Yetzer HaRa, often misunderstood as simply the evil inclination, but in truth, a far more complex and necessary force. The Yetzer Hara is the raw impulse of desire, of ego, hunger, striving, passion. It is the fire that builds homes, starts families, creates art, and fuels survival. Without it, nothing would move. But when it is left unexamined, unrefined, unanchored in soul awareness, it becomes distorted. It becomes the golem, the strength without reflection. It feeds that barren tree in Yeats's mirror, not because it's evil, but because it is untethered from wisdom. The sages say that without the Yetzer Hara, or that raw impulse of desire, we would never do anything. We wouldn't marry, build, create, or act. But without the Yetzer HaTov, or the inclination towards goodness and harmony, we forget why we do any of it at all. One of it moves us, the other orients us. And so we return again to the Garden of Eden, where the tree of life stood side by side with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The tree of life is not innocence, it is integration. The other tree is not cursed, it is complexity without wholeness. It is knowledge grasped before it could be understood and integrated. It is the mind split from the heart, so the loss of mind-heart coherence. And so the great fall then is not about disobedience, but about a perception fractured, the moment when the desire to know outpaces the capacity to integrate. And in that split, the Shekinah, the soul of the world, becomes hidden. So when Yeats speaks of the twisted tree seen through the bitter glass, he is describing the soul turned outward in exile, dominated by the Yetzer Hara, desire, endlessly seeking, grasping, judging, comparing, while the tree of life quietly waits to be seen again through the eyes of the Yetzer HaTov, or harmony and goodness, which returns to us as compassion, clarity, and connection. One of them feeds distortion, the other feeds vision. The mystical teaching is not to destroy the Yetzer Hara, or shadow, but to harness it, to direct its fire toward the service of the good. The tree of distortion and the tree of clarity are not really separate trees at all. They are one tree, bearing different fruit depending on which inner current is flowing through us. So the question Yeats invites us into is not just which tree we see, but which one we are cultivating with our everyday choices, the habits of our lives and perception, and our courage to face the shadow, and our willingness to return to the sacred center of the self. The psychologist Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." In his work, he talked about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to see and therefore project outward. So within this context, a pattern emerges that what we cannot hold and face within ourselves begins to appear outside of us as a barren, threatening, or cruel landscape. And that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to understand ourselves better. And that the shadow, it doesn't harm us, but it challenges the whole personality because it demands moral effort to face. This is why someone can be so beautiful, yet see only ugliness when they gaze in the mirror. Or you can live in a world full of meaning and still experience it as emptiness. Because the distortion doesn't live in the tree, it lives in the glass. Yeats is quietly urging us not to wage war on the world we see, but to tend to the inner vision through which we see it. And so rather than asking which tree is real, the invitation is to ask which one we are feeding with our attention, with our fear and our unexamined habits of perception. Now, sometime today, take some time to gently sit in front of a mirror and really look at yourself. Stare at all of the parts of your face. And when a thought arises that is negative, question it with gentleness and with intention, asking yourself whether what you see is the truth or a distortion born of your own inner wounds and shadow. And take some time to be gentle and loving, slowly loosening the threads of that distortion so that you may see your own tree in its full vibrancy once again. Thank you so much for joining me, Mystic Travelers. If you are interested in learning more about the Kabbalistic tree of life, the exile of the Shekinah through the shattering of the vessels myth, and if you want to know more about shadow work, you are welcome to join me in my series called Embodying the Tree of Life, which I will link below. Go in peace, beloveds. Tend to your inner tree, and I will see you next week.